Welcome to Racket Stringing Tips, and this is Patrick, and back with another video. And I wanted to touch on, I got 20 tips today, and I wanted to go over addressing common stringing challenges. So you're stringing, and these are some common things that I hear that sometimes come up. So I wanted just to kind of get into some of those and break them down a little bit. Again, if you have questions or have comments about it, please leave that in the comment section. And if you get some value out of this, please like, subscribe, and also I'll also link our new community that's free to join, and that way you can collaborate with other stringers, and we have weekly live calls that we get on, talk about different subjects. All right, so let's go get right into it. All right, so some common stringing challenges that I see a lot of stringers have. Hopefully some of these will resonate with you. Hopefully it'll be some good information for you to look at. So number one, uneven challenges. Uneven challenges, sorry, it's late. Uneven tension. Ensuring consistent polling tension by calibrating your stringing machine regularly. Okay, there's lots of reasons why you might have uneven tension, right? The first thing I would do, of course, is look at your machine. Check the tension, have a tension, have a meter that you can check the accuracy of the tension on your machine to make sure it is calibrated and it is actually pulling at what you think it is. I mean, that would be the first thing that I would check. After that, I would also be looking at your knots. Are your knots consistent? Are you using the same type of knots, same places that you're normally tying off? This especially applies, you can check this like if you've got two rackets and you're like the same racket that you're supposed to string right after each other, you're like, something's not coming out right. The next thing is, are you pulling the same amount of strings on both sides? Generally, I use a pattern, whether it's like when I'm stringing the mains, whether it's 3 on one side, 3 on another, and I always start on the same side. So the way that I can ensure that I'm staying on the same side is I would make sure that the butt cap is up on the racket. So every time I mount the racket on the machine, I look, okay, butt cap up. After a while, it's just kind of it's a natural thing. You just look and, okay, it's up. And then that way you're always going to say, all right, I'm always going to start on the right. I'm always going to start on the left. I'm always going to do 3, or I'm always going to pull 4 on one side and then 4 on another. I know some people, to really adjust it to keep it even, is 2 and 2. The whole idea here is that, when you're stringing a racket, depending on what kind of mounting system you have, whether it's a 2-point or 6-point mounting, you can kind of see the racket either giving a little bit or changing a little bit in the shape. And so when that happens, right, it can adjust the strings a little bit. So those are some things I would check. Tie-off knots. Check your tie-off knots to make sure you're not losing any tension on those. And the way that you can do that, of course, is to what I do is I'll tie a knot. I'll put a mark with like a Sharpie on the string, and then as soon as I release the clamp, if it's slipping and I can see that little mark moving, then I could tell that I possibly have lost it a little bit, and I got to work on my knots a little bit. The last thing on that I would say is that sometimes you can lose tension on is when you clamp the strings. Sometimes I see people, stringers, not clamp close to the frame. So I would always say clamp as close to the frame, because then what happens when the string goes around the corner in a loop and then you're pulling it, there could be a little piece of string that is between the frame and your clamp that is not taut. So I would make sure that so anyway, so that those are some things that can help you alleviate some of the uneven tension. If you have some ideas on some other ways, or you've seen some other uneven tension problems, please leave that in the comments. Okay, the next thing, number 2, string breakage. Okay, this is a big one. I got a little story here. Back in 2008, I think it was, when Wilson introduced the Biardo at the US Open. We were stringing there, and the engineers were there too, working out all of the bugs and working out, making it just right. And on a couple things, like it kept breaking all the time. The string just kept breaking, and it was kind of had to do with the clamps, I think, or um, I think that was the situation. You know, or another time, it's like, you just keep seeing the string breaking at the same place all the time. You're like, okay, well, obviously it's something's going on. The first thing I always check is the clamps. I always make sure that the clamps are not too taut or too loose, or it could be slipping. But you think, oh, polyester string, it's so durable. I can just crank that thing up, and that just to hold on to it tight, it's not going to break. No, but it damages the fibers, and so you've got to have it just right, not too loose, not too tight. That's why I'm always talking about racket maintenance. I mean, racket machine maintenance, keeping those clamps clean, things like that. So I'm thinking that's kind of one of the things. Looking at the grommets, making sure that it's not going around too many. Look at if it's going around a sharp corner, that maybe you have to figure out a way to mitigate that corner a little bit, so that the string won't break. Make sure, check the string. I mean, is it old string? Is it like from, old stock that you've had laying around for a couple of years? Those are some things that I think about. Of course, if it's just something like, it's just breaking premature on maybe for your client, go to a thicker string, or go to maybe a different type of a string that is more durable as well. Change some things up a little bit. All right, number 3, time-consuming stringing. Okay, so sometimes you feel like maybe you're spending too much time with just stringing a racket. Sometimes you might not have all your tools laid out where you want them, and you have to kind of search for your tools, or you have so much stuff in your tool rack. Just keep your workspace clean, right? Have it organized. Make it so that you can find all of your tools, and they're all right there when you need them, so you don't have to go find them. And yeah, just have everything there that you need, so that you don't have an issue with that. Number 4, difficulty tying knots. This could come, how do you alleviate that? Well, obviously you need to know a couple knots for yourself, because sometimes you can't always use the same knot because you've got a hole that's maybe blocked, and you have to maybe go somewhere else, or you have to use a different kind of a knot, or the string is too thick, and so if you use that knot, it sticks out too much. Those are some things. So you really, I think, need to practice doing knots so that you get better at it and that you don't have slippage. So, at first, yeah, it's going to take you some time getting that knot right, but after a while, it just becomes second nature. And so just, practice that to get efficient on that, because, you want to create a technique that works and it's consistent, and use the same one every time, whether you use a Parnell knot, or you use a traditional, like a Wilson knot. There's a few other ones as well. You can Google those, and there are some good videos. And even Richard Parnell has good videos on his own. Misweaving strings. Okay, so how do you alleviate that? Well, sometimes, like if you're maybe new to stringing, what you might want to do as you start the crosses, every once in a while, check just to make sure that you can get down and kind of look, and you can pretty much tell if everything is lined up. And once you get to the bottom, before you tie off the last string, on the crosses, maybe just take a double look, because if by chance you misweaved, you could go back. I mean, it's not maybe the best because you've already pulled those strings, but it just depends on what your situation is. But I would always do that before I tie and secure the last knot and take it off the machine. Just make sure. And then secondary, when you do get it off the machine, basically I'll take a look at it from an angle, and I can tell right away if there's a misweave. I'll double check it like that. Plus, when you're straightening the strings with an awl or with your hands, you usually will obviously pick up on any of that. So you do not ever want to let a racket go with a misweave. You think, nobody's going to notice, right? I mean, number one is you don't want to think like that. But secondary, it gets noticed. Somebody will notice it. And then, that's kind of like such a rookie error. Happens to all of us. But just you really need to check that. So that's how you eliminate that. Just have a few checks for yourself along the way. The next thing, number 6, customer dissatisfaction with tension. That happens sometimes. So how do you alleviate? Well, you're not always going to be 100% here because different machines are have different tension, I guess, outcomes sometimes. Because if I say, oh, 55 pounds, well, the computerized electronic machine that the shop down the street strung the racket at last time might feel different than the 55 pounds that you are stringing on a drop weight machine. So what you can do to alleviate some of the problems is you can, when you talk to the client, just say, hey, so, I mean, if they didn't string with you last time, it's like, okay, so where did you get your racket strung? Do you know what kind of machine they used? And then you can kind of say, well, I use electronic pull, 55 pounds, might feel a little bit tighter. It might feel more, I mean, it would obviously be more consistent. It's a better feel, but it might feel different than the 55 on a drop weight, and also the experience of the stringer possibly. So if it's coming from somebody who was stringing the rackets themselves, and then they're bringing it to you and say, yeah, I used to string this at 55 and I'm not very good at it, then you might well think like, well, okay, so just beware, I'll string it at 55 or 54, but that might feel like, really tight. So maybe we want to go down a little bit, especially if you weren't that, you know, if you didn't feel like you were doing a good job on that. So I would always kind of bring that up before I take the racket, just to make sure. That way you don't have that dissatisfaction later on, because the customer's always right? I mean, we always have difficulties with, oh, it feels different, or especially if you change string too. I would always say too, well, all right, now you're going to a thinner string. There might be some changes in the way that it feels at that tension, or you're going to a thicker string or a different type of a string, things like that. Number 7, grommet damage. Regularly inspect and replace worn grommets to protect the strings. Okay, well, that's one of the general maintenance things that you do when you first bring in a racket. You look, I'll just take a scan of the head guard and the grommets all the way around, make sure nothing's split, that's visually there. And if so, have communication with the client about it before I even string. And then if it needs grommets, or if it needs some tubing, let them know. And again, this is maybe a way to increase some money. It takes extra time to add grommets in there. That's maybe a service that you can do. Like, okay, you know what? I can repair this a little bit so that you don't have to replace all of the grommets. And so, of course, you're going to charge a little extra labor. Maybe add a couple dollars to it, right? Yeah, let me know what you think about that, and if you've done that. String slippage. Okay, so generally, when you first start a racket, that's where I see a lot of slippage happen and a lot of damage to the string. And you go, well, it just slipped a little bit, but it has that later on is probably where it's going to prematurely break. So it's really important, especially initially when you first start the frame, first start the stringing, that you really secure those first few strings so they don't slip through the clamp. So I generally will use a starting clamp, and I will put that clamp right behind the machine fixed clamp. So that way, if I pull a string and then I see that the starting clamp is moving a little bit tight, then I know I need to adjust the clamps, but I haven't damaged the string because there really wasn't a whole lot of movement. It was just that you could tell that it's not 100%, staying taut just by the machine clamp. Another place where I would say, yeah, that's usually the biggest part where you see slippage. I mean, obviously the clamps could slip anywhere throughout, but maintenance, keeping the clamps clean, keeping them from all oils and things like that, and especially in between stringing rackets, especially if, let's say, you just strung a really oily kind of string, like a Wilson NXT, or a string that had maybe a natural gut, or some other string that maybe had some coating on it and the residue on there, and then all of a sudden you string another racket, that becomes a problem. If you're changing gauges, so you strung an 18 gauge and now you're stringing a 16 gauge, you're going to need to adjust the clamps a little bit. So you can kind of get a feel for it when after you've had enough experience with that. But that's kind of how you really eliminate that string slippage. Next one, inconsistent string bed feel. This is where possibly you weren't consistent in the way that you were pulling string. You maybe did not straighten the strings as you were stringing the racket. Because if you just leave the strings in and you don't tighten them to the most degree that you can, and then later on tighten them, it's going to cause some inconsistency. And depending on what kind of machine you use, a constant pull machine obviously is going to help alleviate a lot more of the issues with consistency on that. Sometimes when you tie off the top cross, maybe you didn't add extra poundage, and so it seems like it's getting a little looser at the top. You're getting slippage on your knots. Could be a lot of different reasons, but those are some things that I would look at first. Next thing, managing your string inventory. Like sometimes you might not even know what you have, right? So keep everything inventoried, and have it organized in a way, whether it's in some cabinets, and you have it all labeled, you have it on a piece of paper, or you have it on a spreadsheet on the computer, so that way where everything that you have, so you don't have to go searching for something or see if you happen to have it. It just keeps things a little bit more streamlined, and then when it comes time to reorder, you know exactly what you need to reorder, and you don't end up spending extra money that you don't need to. High stringing costs. Okay, as strings start getting more expensive, maybe you got some at a discount or a sale. Look for those discounts in quantity sales, or just every once in a while, maybe look on the websites that you shop on, or connect with your rep that maybe you have an account with, and kind of look for the specials, because that's maybe a time, have some money set aside so that you can buy when the deals are like they are, so that you don't get to a point where you have to spend more on a set of string because you need it right away. Racket frame damage. So number one, I always check the frame before I take a racket in to make sure there's no problems with the integrity of the frame, that there's no cracks or damage to it, because I can then relay that information to the client. When you mount it on your machine, make sure, depending on what kind of mounting system you have, that it's secure at all areas, that it's on straight, that you have it adjusted. You don't have the machine too tight, the mounting system too tight on the racket where there's not any play. And make sure it's not too loose where possibly the racket can flex too much during the stringing. Next one, difficulty with hybrid stringing. Okay, so make sure that there's lots of different types of hybrids, and make sure that you document what string you put in each, meaning like I put this string in the mains and I put this string in the crosses, so that not everybody's always going to know that the first string that you wrote down is the mains and the second is the crosses. So just really label it, and then label the tension of each, so that way it doesn't there's no confusion there. So finding the right string tension for your client, okay, that sometimes is one of those things that could be challenging when you're stringing. So the way that I would address that is, I would of course first find out what the person has been stringing, and if they're using the same string. Well, I always say try to only change one variable. So what variables am I talking about? I'm talking about the racket, that's a variable. The tension of the string is a variable. And then the type of string is a variable, right? So if somebody has a racket that they've been using and they've been using a certain string at a certain um, tension, and so now they're giving you a different string, or you're using a different string, and um, they also want a different tension, you're not going to know, like, there's two variables that you're changing. So later, if they end up not liking it, which of those variables is it? So a lot of times, if somebody is, wanting to find the right string tension, and they have a racket, the same string, same, a tension of 60, let's say, and they say, well, I want a little bit more control. I want it to feel a little bit more crisper. So, okay, you're using the same string, same racket, add 2 pounds, you know, and go with that, right? If you're going to change out the string, I would probably say, hey, let's try it straight, leave the string, and then we'll leave the tension, at what you were used to, and then we can come back. Because that way it's a lot easier to make adjustments. So hopefully that was clear, without confusing me too much on that. Dealing with unusual racket shapes. This one is sometimes you have to account for larger rackets and know that, like, at a certain racket, you're going to have to do a hybrid because it's going to take more than a set of string, or it's going to take 40 feet or 39 feet. So you can't use a set of 38. And if you're measuring and you normally measure 38.5 feet, you're going to have to make sure you measure more. Number 16, time pressure from customers. Everybody wants their racket done, right away, and, forget about that you're in the middle of another racket. They want their racket strung right away, right? If you only have the luxury of having one machine and you're in the middle of a racket, well, obviously then that eliminates any confusion, right? You've got to string your racket first and then get to their racket. But be realistic when you're talking to them. I know sometimes I've done that where it's like, oh yeah, I can get that done in 20 minutes, and you're only halfway through a racket that you have to get done before you even get to their racket. Don't set those expectations, because sometimes they'll come back during exactly at that time, and you're still working on the racket. And then so really just say, hey, you know what, I want to do a good job with your racket. I've got this customer that I'm finishing up. I'll go ahead and take care of you afterwards. So come back and such, or you can wait and hang out. This is also an opportunity for you to possibly offer another service as far as scheduling online appointments, kind of like when you schedule an appointment with your, getting a haircut, or taking your car in, or going to the doctor, right? You make an appointment, and well, of course, those, when you go to some of those appointments, you expect to wait a while, right? Especially with the doctor's foot. But as far as, like, you have some expectation of when you should be able to start. So you can set that up. So that way it's a service to your customer, and possibly it's a way for you to retain some of these clients because they appreciate that kind of service. All right, the next one. Physical strain from stringing. Some of us, sometimes if you have a little bit of back issue, or you've got some arthritis, or the machine, or, you have to lean over the machine. So there's only so much you can do with the machine that you have. If you have something like a Wilson Biardo, or there's a few other machines on the market that ergonomically they'll come up to you. You can adjust them for the mains different than the crosses, and so it's like kind of adjust to you, to your level, to your height, so that you don't have to stretch over and lean over as much. It's kind of alleviates that. The clamps are easy to use, so you don't have to use a lot of hand motion. so that creates problems with your hand. Um, so those are some things that you can do. Um, Maybe have a chair that you can sit down in between stringing so that you're not standing all day long. Those are some things. Adjust your machine to the best that you can so that you're not leaning over too much. Um, Not slippage. I think I already talked about that a little bit, but yeah, that's where you can basically, practice tying knots, put a mark on it. When you pull the clamp off, you can see if you're getting any slippage there, because you can lose a lot of tension, especially when you have 4 knots. Do you have calibration issues with your machine? Like maybe customers are coming in and they're saying, "Oh, it doesn't feel like it did last time," or you've been stringing a lot of rackets, or you moved your machine around from location to location. Check the tension, see if it needs to be calibrated. It's really important that it comes out consistently. You don't have to do it every day, maybe, or maybe if you're used to stringing maybe 10 rackets a day, every morning when you first get to the machine, maybe check the calibration, make sure it's on. That way you don't have any issues. I always would say too, if you're moving the machine from location to location, or you bumped it and it moved around, or you had to move it a little bit to vacuum or whatever, it's good to check, because sometimes that calibration, depending on what kind of machine it is, it can get a little bit out of sorts. Maybe if you, yeah, I think just a lot of stringing will do that as well. So, okay, number 19, we got just 2 more to go. 19, calibration issues with the machine. No, that's the one I just said, sorry. Okay, number 20, customer requests for specific strings. All right, so once you've been stringing, maybe in your territory long enough, you kind of know what everybody's using. You kind of know what to carry. You obviously can't carry every single string. Um, you can maybe survey some of your clients. After a while, you might maybe know some things that you can carry. Or what you do is you just carry a good number of strings so that you cover all the different categories. As an example, natural gut. Well, you're not going to carry 3 different brands naturally. Go with the best, right? Either you're going to use Wilson gut, maybe Vocal gut, or probably Babolat Touch, right? You're going to probably just use Babolat. You can't go wrong with Babolat. Maybe you'll use Wilson's or instead, right? You probably only need to carry one type of natural gut. Then when you go into maybe the polys, well, you probably need some Luxilon, some Solinco, some, you know, uh, you probably don't need, a lot of the other companies, but maybe I can't think of any other one right offhand that I would think of. But yeah, like Solinco and maybe Luxilon, and maybe a few other specialty ones. Then some multifilaments, maybe even from Gamma. Gamma's got some different type of string, so maybe have something from Gamma, and then some just basic synthetics like Prince Duraflex. Can't go wrong with that. Some multifilaments, Wilson NXT, some Sensation, maybe a few of the other brands. Maybe start with 10 strings. And then, of course, you have to adjust, like, okay, 16, 17, 18 gauge, how am I going to, adjust that for that? Just kind of have a good mix. And then once you start seeing what sells, then you can kind of maybe expand into more offerings as well. Some like to just go deep in a few, or some like to go wide and not as deep, right? And yeah, so that pretty much sums up the 20 tips I was thinking about today. And so hopefully there's a few there that resonate with you, that maybe help alleviate some challenges that you might have had. So please, if you got some value out of that, share this video. And I'm going to leave a link to joining my community over at school. It's a great platform. I'm going to have some courses in there, and you know, just getting started on that. And I'm going to have weekly live calls that I'll be jumping on with some Q&As and some specific topics. So please, you know, check that out if you like this content. You know, we're going to go much deeper there as well. So all right, that's it for today. Have a great evening, and we'll see you soon.